Here we go. Welcome to Azure Community Live. I'm Lars Clint, and we have another really cool session coming up. Not a session like we've done before, and I'll get to that in just a minute. But first of all, Azure Community Live, we're an online meetup, Azure for the community, and we are created by the community. So all of us that host it are part of the Azure community in some way or another. I'm your host. My name is Lars Clint, and so we came up with the idea for this meetup is that we wanted anyone, anywhere to be part of the Azure community if you wanted to. I live in rural Australia, like really rural, just outside this window here. I normally have llamas. I would show you if there were any there, but there isn't right now. They've probably gone somewhere else. But that means I can't just go to a meetup in a city. It's 2 hours away. So I really appreciate these online meetups. And you know, it's a way for me to give back. Which is also, if you would like to give back, we'd love to hear from you to present at Azure Community Live at some point. And all you need is an internet connection, a webcam, and a microphone. And probably a computer, actually. Anyway, our YouTube channel, you can use the Call for Papers link on our website. There's many ways you can get in touch with us. Twitter works as well. But first, let me introduce Christina. Hello, Christina Warren. How are you?
Hello, I'm good. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really glad we could do this. And it's funny because the time zone difference, it can be really difficult because I think you're 17 hours ahead or something like that, and 19 hours ahead, something like that. But it works out well this kind of time of day. It is like 7 p.m. Pacific time where I'm located, but it's like around noonish or whatever lunchtime for you. So hopefully this is working well for a lot of people out there.
Well, that's the plan. Well, that was the intention anyway. And yes, we do live in the future in Australia. That's correct. So
I love it.
So Christina, you are a senior cloud avocado advocate.
That's correct.
For Microsoft, well, cloud sort of says the whole thing, right? It's part of the Azure team. So what does that mean? What do you do as a senior cloud avocado advocate?
Advocate and avocado, both. So my job is basically I'm both a fruit. I think avocado is a fruit, right? I'm both a fruit and an advocate. So my job is basically I do a lot of kind of strategy and video and kind of storytelling work for developer relations at Microsoft. And so a lot of what my job does and how I think you and I met the first time is we met at a conference in Sydney. I guess it was now about a year and a half ago. And I go to conferences when those are a thing that can exist, or meetups like this, and I talk to people, and I try to mostly, I think, just kind of connect with the community and try to get their feedback on what are the cool things they're building, what are their pain points, what are the things they're interested in learning more about, and then creating content for that. And then I also go back to the product teams, and we kind of act as an API in some ways between the communities and the product teams to kind of give them real-time feedback about how things are actually being used, or maybe some ideas. Sometimes it means working on the products or the documentation or whatever it might be ourselves. Sometimes it's passing on really positive feedback, and sometimes it's the inverse, right? It's like one of the things that we're going to be talking about today is something that a lot of members of my team actually worked on directly with the product team because we saw that it was a need. And we're then able to, and now what we're kind of doing is trying to tell people about it and say, hey, this is something that might help you out and that you might be interested in. So that's it. I also do on our YouTube channel, Microsoft Developer, or Channel 9, if you're familiar with that. I host a lot of the content there. I do like a weekly, or at this point it's bi-weekly, but it'll be coming back more frequently as we get a better handle on the remote logistics of things, called This Week in Channel 9, which is kind of a rundown of all the latest news happening in kind of the Microsoft developer space. It's very similar to a show that you do and that you're part of. And so we've bonded over that. And that's kind of it.
Yeah. So am I right in saying that if anyone watching this either live right now or in the future as a recording, which is also right now anyway, they can contact you if they have something to say, hey, I don't think this is working the way it should, and you can actually be that conduit between the user and the engineer that builds it?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I might not be able to, fix everything you want, and I might not be able to,
Sure.
to track down everything to your ability. I'm not a miracle worker, right? But yes, I mean, that's exactly it. If you have issues, like what I will do is at least try to point you in the right direction and get your feedback recorded and follow up on that stuff. Because honestly, that's how I think that we can make the best products is by communicating the most with our communities. And the way I kind of see my role is I'm not advocating for Microsoft. I'm advocating for the developer. Like I kind of see it as the inverse of that. I mean, in an ideal world, right? Like you want to use Azure, you want to use our solutions. We want to show you what some of the cool things we can do are. But that's
Definitely.
not like what I feel like my primary job is. Like for me, I feel like it's more like I talk to people, I do a lot of talking, try to do a lot of listening, try to do a lot of observing, and I want to take that feedback and those, kind of commentary, good, bad, whatever, back to the product teams and the engineering teams so that they understand the community's point of view. Because what it's like when and this is true for all of us. When you're in the middle of kind of a sprint in your own kind of dev cycle, you kind of get tunnel vision and you're focused on, okay, this is how I built this thing. And yes, you do testing and you get feedback and you have official mechanisms for that, but it's hard to keep abreast of what's happening and of what people are saying. And maybe you had an idea of how somebody would use a feature and it ends up being used in a completely different way. Or sometimes maybe you built a feature that solves a solution, but it's not super intuitive, and maybe there can be a way that other people can let people know about that. And so I think it's really good to, when you can, to have that kind of conduit of somebody. And so I think what our team's role really is we try to be that representative for the community within our product and engineering teams.
Yeah, that's really cool. And often a couple of 100,000 people using your product does tend to give some solutions that a single team couldn't have thought of. So that makes perfect sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So today, and this is again, I'm coming back to the format, because normally we have a very a presentation that has been prepared, etc., etc. Christina and I kind of just came up with this, and we said, what do you want to talk about? Well, Azure Static Website. That seemed like a good idea, so here we are. So we're going to talk about Azure Static Websites. But if you want to talk about something else, or you want us to talk about something else, there is a comment box or a chat window on YouTube. Comment on the YouTube feed. So please do. Someone already said, Christina, hello from Oz. Please do comment in there, and I'll keep an eye on it while we go through the session. And any questions are totally fair, so we'll get to those. But I am going to switch over and let Christina share her screen, and I will just kick it off that way.
Yeah.
How about that?
All right, excellent. All right, so I've got a bunch of stuff kind of up on my screen right now. And yes, as Lars mentioned, this is not going to be super prepared, which most of these things are, and that is my fault. I should have done more due diligence, but I honestly, also, I kind of like this, though, to be honest. I think that it's good for us to just kind of have a conversation and be more relaxed, which happens, at least for me, some of my favorite in-person meetups. They're not as structured. It can be good to have a structure, but also become kind of pat. So one of the things that we announced at Microsoft Build was this new thing, which is in preview right now, and it's called Azure Static Web Apps. And so if you've used, a service like Netlify, or even something like GitHub Pages, you might be familiar with kind of the power of a static website or a static web app, as opposed to, building on a complete complex, more dynamic, a framework like, WordPress, or another, backend that has that can consume a lot of data, and that can require a lot of caching, and that can frankly take up more upkeep than what you might need if you're just either putting together a simple kind of React app or something in Node, or if you just need like a simple static website that isn't changing its content all the time, and you don't need a lot of maintenance, but you don't want to have this completely complex kind of infrastructure to keep it up if for some reason more than a certain number of people visited it at one time, right? And so our solution is this thing called Azure Static Web Apps, and it's currently in preview. And the idea is basically you can point the static web app to a GitHub repo, and you can basically, once you make changes to that repo, it's going to push that content into a statically served site. It's free. It's going to be just kind of using Azure storage. It's going to free up to a certain amount of traffic. I think it's something like 100 gigabytes. and you can do a lot with that. And so it becomes a really easy way of, hey, I have a great idea for a site, or maybe, I want to do like a simple page app. I don't want to go through the process of setting up a complete server instance, even using something like, containers or some serverless stuff. I just don't want to kind of bother with that. I just want to point it to a Git repo and let everything kind of be taken care of for me. And so that's what this is. Have you used this, Lars? Totally. Yeah, so I mean, actually, it's funny you say like going back to 1997 again, and you're right, it is. And if this is boring to people in the chat, feel free to interject. But when the web kind of started, you had like Perl and you had PHP and you had some of these other kind of early web languages, and you had kind of the difference between kind of a dynamic site and a static site. And the challenge, the reason that the dynamic languages like PHP were great was that you could change the content on the fly and you wouldn't have to rebuild your entire site when people would come see it again. Whereas the advantage with a static site and something with static assets would be that it's just, people could access the static asset. It's not needing to be updated in real time all the time, and it's not needing to be served individually every single time someone pings the server. So you could use things once, even before things like CDNs became common. It would be, a relatively easy way to serve lots of traffic at once. And so when you saw people starting to build kind of web frameworks, in the late 90s and the early 2000s, a lot of people were having kind of these wars between a dynamic site and something more static. And the disadvantage at the time of using something more static for templating was that it would take a really long time to rebuild. So the idea would be, okay, I have my site, but I say, for instance, a blog. Blog was a perfect example. I have my site. I want to add a new entry. Every time I add a new entry to my blog, I have to rebuild the entire site from scratch. And with the way that the languages were optimized and the way the web servers, worked then and all kinds of other things, that could take a long time. And so, might take, 10, 15 minutes. And, that's not a huge deal, but it could be enough of a problem that if you're blogging regularly, it would have some downtime and people maybe wouldn't always see the latest version of your site. And that's why something like WordPress was really amazing, because it was like, okay, you don't have to rebuild your site every time you put in a new blog entry. And think, platforms like Tumblr took it to yet another level where you could very quickly see things. But the downside of those platforms is that because the page has to be loaded every single time someone visits it, you could run into caching problems. So if a ton of people visit your site at once, that's going to, require more server space and more bandwidth. And, you have to start getting into things like Memcached and Redis and looking at, okay, do I need to offload some of these assets to a CDN? And people have run into that. And so even for something like a simple WordPress website, which could just be like your personal domain, what was, 15 years ago, the kind of de facto way to do things, and can still be a good way to do stuff, now becomes this like huge level of overhead when all you really want is I just want a site for my project. It's not going to change that often. But also when I do want to make changes, I don't want to have to wait a ton of time for it to rebuild. And so what's happened in the last 5 or 6 years or so has been this thing that's kind of called the Jamstack. And so the idea is basically using, like a JavaScript in a lot of these JavaScript frameworks, things like Svelte and Vue and Gatsby and Hugo and Jekyll. And basically these are some JavaScript-based kind of static site frameworks. And the idea is that you have just a folder of files. They're usually written in Markdown and some sort of templating language. And JavaScript stuff happens on the server side and processes those into CSS and HTML and serves them. And when you want to add a new entry or make a change, you just make a change to that text file and it quickly redeploys. And so, they can be used for anything. I mean, this would be a great thing. Like, again, a blog is a great use case, or a personal page, or a landing page for maybe a project you've got. If it's not going to be something that's super, super complex, and that you have like a lot of things where people are entering in, a lot of advanced forms, or you have like a lot of dynamic parts of the site that need to be controlled individually, a static site is a great way to go about doing that. And because of the different frameworks that exist now, you don't have to go through that process of figuring out, like, okay, what kind of caching do I need? What kind of plugins do I need to set up? How big does my, VM need to be, or my container, or whatever the case may be? What kind of, database am I using? You don't even have to use a database. It's all just text files. So there are a lot of advantages to, ironically, going back to what we were doing 20 years ago. The difference is that 20 years ago, the servers weren't as fast. We didn't have, server-side and client-side JavaScript the way that we do now that could rebuild things the way that they are. And
I have a question.
So
I have a question
in
for
some
you.
ways, it feels like it's the best of both worlds.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
Yes. So this is actually a good question. It's Ozbobwa. I'm guessing it's Bob from WA. How could authentication be put on a static website? Are you going to get to that a little bit later? Because it could be a bit of an extended scenario, but that's a really good question.
That's a really good question. So I'm not going to get into that with this demo, but that is a great question. And that's a little bit more complicated. You could set up things. The best way to do that would probably be to use some sort of kind of like serverless function, or something else where you would have, whatever your authentication solution would be, hitting that, and then that would be going to a different, server someplace to authenticate, to then give you access to what that content would be. So there's definitely a way to do it, but that is going to be, that's one of those things that would be a little more complex. But certainly, if you wanted to have, static assets that were behind some sort of authentication thing, you could do that in whatever front end you wanted to do, and at whatever point you wanted to do it. That might even be something you could do at kind of like the depending on how you're hosting this, like kind of at that kind of core, like, server level, like to even get access, you've got to enter in some admin stuff. But that's a really good question. And I appreciate that, Bob, because what I'm going to actually do, again, going back to the whole like avocado thing, advocate thing, is I'm going to make a note to talk to our team about that. For static web apps, because I think that would make a great tutorial and great content. So thank you for that question.
Yeah, very cool. And Bob, I'm sorry, Bob, if your name's not Bob, but that's what your YouTube thing says. I'm just going to keep saying Bob. Bob saying happy to be pointed to docs or resources as well. Or anyone on Twitter that knows what.
Yeah, for sure. And
so.
Absolutely. And if you want to put in the chat here, I'm going to do just kind of the documentation. I'm going to send you a link in Skype, Lars.
No problem.
And this is where all of our main documentation is for this stuff. And this is being updated relatively frequently, which is great. That goes through a lot of things. One thing I will say about this, and we'll kind of go into the demo, this is still in preview, and so it's free in the preview. I don't know anything about pricing or when this is coming out of preview. There are some limitations. For instance, I think you're limited to 10 of these sites per account. Okay. But there's a lot of stuff you can still do with this. So
all right.
All right. So if you want to get started with this, kind of the first thing that you want to do is you want to go to creating a resource. And in this case, I'm going to go to create resource in Azure. So if you're in the Azure portal, just go to create a resource. And I'm just going to look for static web app, which is in preview. And so that's going to come up. And I'm going to go to create. And it's going to ask me what subscription I want to do this for, what resource group I want. I'm actually going to create a new one for this one, which is Azure Meetup. And then I can enter in a name for my static web app. And so I'll just say Christina Site Meetup. and what region I want, and I'm just going to go ahead and use the central US region. Right now, this is free. Now, the way that this works right now is that you need to point it to a GitHub repo, but feedback that we have, and I know this is something the team is working on, is to, in an ideal world, allow you to point this to any Git repository. So it wouldn't necessarily have to be on GitHub. It could be, on another Git provider, or it could be on like Azure, DevOps, or whatever the case may be. But right now it is with GitHub. So I'm going to sign into GitHub. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose my organization, which is what I want. And I'm going to choose my accounts. And the great thing about this is that you can choose either private or public repos. So if you have a private repo, and I'll actually show you here, you can see this is the repo I'm going to be using, and it is private, but I'm going to actually be using this. And then just setting what branch I want to do that for. And then I can go to review and create, and this is going to test these things out and make sure that everything is correct. And it says that it is. So now this is just submitting that deployment. And now that is underway. And I can go to the resource. And here we go. And right now, it's going to give me a URL, which is just kind of nonsense. If you want, you can actually point this to a custom URL, and which is great. But right now, it's just going to give me a blank URL. When I go there, it's actually going to say that my site is live and it's waiting for my content. And so I will actually put this in the chat as well, Lars, so that if people want to check this out and they can see. I'm not going to promise that this will still exist after this meetup. I'll keep it up for a little bit of time. Oh my God, hello, llamas. Oh my God. They're so good. They're so good. I love them. I'm not going to promise that I'm going to keep this going forever, but I'll try to keep this up for a little while so that people can actually see where this goes. But basically, you can see, just similar to if you're creating other Azure assets, it's just kind of giving you, a random name, and but this time the actual root domain is Azure static apps.net. So that's what that is. And I can actually, what I can see here too is that I can see kind of my deployment history for GitHub action runs, and I have a workflow file, which is just a YAML file that I can use too. Okay, so I have this now, and I actually have initiated this repo. And when I go to that repository now, I go into GitHub. What I'll see is that there is now a kind of a hidden folder that has some workflows here. And what this is a CI file. It's basically a YAML file that is going to tell this how to deploy this to Azure static web apps. So that's what that's doing. Now, when I go into Visual Studio Code, I'm just going to close this out. I go to Visual Studio Code, I'm going to open, and I'm going to choose the folder where I kind of have things done. And when I open this up, there's nothing here. And what it's actually doing is I'm going to now do a pull request to pull in the files that I already have. There are no changes to commit. Okay. That's odd. Let me actually just see if I can open up a different workspace. All right. Let me actually try this, because how I added this might have messed up some of my stuff. the way that my profile was set up. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to go ahead and open. Actually, what you know what? While I'm here, this actually is even better. I'm going to use
this is the beauty
GitHub
of
Codespaces, which is similar to
of live demos, isn't it? It's all good.
It really is.
It's
No, but actually this is better, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to show off GitHub Codespaces. And if you're not familiar with this is something cool we also have with Visual Studio Codespaces. And what this is it basically will create an instance of Visual Studio Code in the browser. And what's great about this is that it will let you creates an Azure, container kind of instance, so to speak, that has all the dependencies and the stuff that you need in your code base. And you can access it from your web browser, meaning you could do it from, a Chromebook, you could do it from an iPad, you can do it from all kinds of different things. And you don't have to worry about, okay, what is the configuration like and what do I have installed on my own machine? And so that makes it really great. So this is now just kind of running this container and it's building these things out. Now, the only thing I'm going to have an issue with here that I've just realized while this is coming up, so maybe we won't use the this for our whole thing, is I realize I'm going to have to install Hugo, and that could take some time. Okay, so all right, so what I have now, actually, let's try this. All right, so I'm now actually all right, I've now got my folder within a folder. Here we go. All right, this is what I wanted, because now I have my static web apps thing. I've got my source control made up. All right, so this is good. All right, so I'm going to go into this folder now, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to just go ahead and use Hugo, which is my personal favorite static site generator, but you could use any number of other ones. And I'm just going to do a quick I'm just going to do a quick new site just so we can deploy this. So what I'm going to do here, I'm in my directory, and I'm just going to go Hugo new site, quick start. And this is giving me, okay, congratulations, I'm ready to go. What I'm going to need to do is basically add kind of a new theme. And in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go into my quick start directory. Again, I'm just following directly from the Hugo documentation.
Can I just interrupt for a second, if you don't mind, Christina?
Of course.
Can you just give a quick rundown of what is Hugo for the people that haven't come across Hugo before?
Oh, yes. Yeah, very, very sorry. Yeah, great question. Okay, so Hugo is a static site generator, and so the idea is that, and again, there are a number of them. There's Jekyll, there is Vue, Press, there is Gatsby, which is based on React, and what it basically is that it's a really easy to kind of use framework that will help you build a static site without having to do all of the overhead of having a full CMS. And so the idea would be you could have that is just kind of a folder of markdown files or text files, whatever you want it to be, that each file has like a different component and part of your page. And by running some JavaScript, server side, that's going to compile all of that into code that is then served with all of your static assets. And so, for instance, for like one of the things is that Digital Gov, which is a United States site, this is actually based in Hugo. And you would look at this and you would think, oh, this is the same as any other, big website. All it is it's just a kind of an easier front end to handle a lot of these things. And there are a number of these options you can use. I like Hugo. It's pretty easy to use. They also have a number of really good looking themes that you can kind of customize if you want to play with the CSS and some of those things. If you're comfortable working with text files, this is going to be a really good option. Now, if you are somebody who is more comfortable using like a traditional CMS like WordPress or something like that, one of the interesting things, and I'm not going to get into this, but I do want to let people know that they can look for this, is that you can actually do what's known as like a headless install. And so what that would mean would be that you would have WordPress running somewhere, which would just be the place you would enter in your content. But the way that it would be served would be using a static site generator like Gatsby or Hugo. And in fact, Ghost, which is also a very popular open source content management system, has a whole way that you could have a local instance even of Ghost, meaning it's not running on a server anywhere. It could just be running on like your local computer that you're using as a place to input your files. But when you hit publish, it's kicking off a build process that is building that out as a static site that could be hosted somewhere like Azure Static Web Apps. So Hugo is one of kind of a number of different services or different kind of platforms that make it really easy to build websites, relatively easy, without having to deal with a bunch of the overhead of some of the other kind of tools out there, and that is relatively there's not I mean, there can be more code involved, but there's not a ton of stuff, especially if you're using a theme where you can bring in other formats if you want to do more than HTML. But like if you're just pretty much comfortable with HTML and if you know Markdown, Hugo is a really good way to go. So that's what Hugo is. So again, we're going to kind of go back. No problem. So, and if anybody has any questions in the chat, let me know too. And their docs are really good. And so again, I'm just going to go to
there is a specific Hugo question, so hang on a second here.
Sure.
Bob's again asking, do you run Hugo or the site generator on your local PC and then post it to GitHub, or do you put it in an Azure function or something?
No, yeah, you run it on your local PC. So the one exception there would be if you were using something like Visual Studio Codespaces or GitHub Codespaces, then you would install it there. But yeah, no, that's a great question. Yeah, you do it on your local PC. And then what's happening is that it's going to create all the different assets and files you need. And when you push that to GitHub, that is then going to, when the action to publish stuff, that's when it's going to execute whatever it needs to do to publish things correctly. But you're not needing to use a function or anything like that. But great question.
Yeah, cool.
All right. So kind of back to here. All right. So now I'm going to do initialize my empty Git repository. And then I'm going to add a submodule here, which is for the theme that we're going to use. And they even have nice instructions for non-Git users if you wanted to deal with things from a zip file perspective, which is completely fine. And so now that is done. And then what I'm going to do is add some content. And so what I'll do is I can basically just now say Hugo new posts, and then I'm just going to give it a slug, which will be hello-world.md, and that's going to create a markdown file. And so what this is going to do, Hugo new posts / hello world.md. And so this is going to create a new markdown file. And so when I go into my Finder, if you're on Windows, if you went into Windows Explorer to look at this, when I go into this file, and I'll be able to show this in Visual Studio Code as well, inside this Quick Start folder, when I go into Content, and it says, I spelled post wrong, so that's great. Let me actually recreate that. But you can see that it's actually created a markdown file. This might actually confuse some things with my theme, so I'm actually going to do Hugo new post / All right. And so what this has done is this has just created a new markdown file that I can open up in any sort of text editor I want, and I can make changes to this. And so when I go into Visual Studio Code, this is already bringing in all of my content. I can see now that I've got my proper post thing here where it has my draft status. I'm going to set this to false, meaning that it's going to be public. And I'm just going to put hello, everyone. If I can spell. And I've saved this now. And I'm just going to go ahead and going to commit all. And let's see if these changes have shown up now. All right, terminal is acting up, so let me grab this again. All right, so now I have uploaded this, and if I go back to my GitHub, I will see that this sorry about this. This is confusing.
It's all good, Christina.
All right.
It's interesting to see
sorry about
how. This. No, but no, don't apologize, because we get to see your thought process of how do you actually debug this, which is kind of interesting as well. So yeah, no stress.
Yeah, no, but this is odd. I'm not actually sure why this is not syncing with my existing repository here. This is what my change is. Because like I see that I have changes here and that it has things. I'm trying to sync this. And yeah, so this is why I'm completely embarrassing myself with this happening right now. Because all of this is working fine. I'm not really sure what the see if that changes things. I know that's exactly what's happening. All right. All right, you know what we're going to do here? I'm going to try to go back to an earlier a website that I'd created, and this will probably go better. All right, so I'm going to go to, yeah, all right. So we should have done this 5 minutes ago. All right, so this is a site that I'd already created here, and I'm actually going to have a hello world post, and I'll say, hello, everyone. I am embarrassed. Yeah, I did. I'm there's something messed up with how my configuration worked, and rather than embarrass myself further with this, and hey, you know what? This is live. This is what happens when we do these things. I'm just going to do this. Spell embarrass correctly. Do this otherwise. Yeah. Okay. Here we go. And now I have these changes where I can actually commit all. And all right. Failed to execute Git. All right, well, maybe that's my problem. Maybe I've got some sort of issue there. But let me just show you what my other site looks like, because at the very least, I can actually use a code space to play with this. So I go to my other website, which is Christina's site, which is a static web app that I created last week. When I go to that URL, you actually see something that I had set up, and I actually have a list of posts here, including one called Hello World. And so this has already been properly set up. What I'm going to do now, because something is clearly messed up with Git on my machine, and I'm not really in the mood to debug that with all of you right now. I'm sure you don't want to see that either, because that's not any fun. I'm going to actually go to that repo, and this is where this is. And what I'm actually going to go here is I could actually create a new file if I wanted to, where I would just be able to, I could do a code space if I wanted to do that, where I could kind of, okay, that's my existing code space. So in this case, what I'm going to do, just for funsies, yep, I'm going to go into my content folder, which is where I would be adding something. I'm going to go into posts because, again, Git is not working on my machine for some reason. And I'm going to create a new file. And I'm just going to call this failureisfun.md. And I'm just going to say, I love demo fails. All right. And now I'm just going to commit this file. And I'm going to commit it directly to the master branch. And yep, there is only one branch. And it's interesting because this actually shows like what this would look like in terms of kind of my dates. And so actually, I probably need to add this bit of declarative stuff to my other post, which is fine. Normally, this would be a lot easier just using the command line, but that is not what our reality is. So I'm going to edit this and add the header information, which is just going to say failure is fun. Give this a new date. Today is the 5th, I believe, or the 4th. 5th. All right. Draft is false, and we'll save this. We're going to commit the changes. And so this has now kicked off this commit. And what this is going to do now is that when I look at my website and I go into my actions, because I have a pipeline set up, what you can actually see is that there's a queue now where it is created in Azure, basically similar to Azure pipelines. This is created a GitHub action. And what this is doing is it is going to be showing how this process is now rebuilding my site. And so I can actually look at the build and deploy job, and I can actually see what is happening here, and that it is actually now building every aspect of the site that I talked about. So it's rebuilding the entire site. It's checking for new things. It's downloaded a newer image coming from where static web apps are. It is now running through the various checkout commands. It is setting up Hugo and reinitializing that, and now it is building and deploying this to Azure. So this is basically said it's in progress, and now we are in the process of it actually publishing things. And so we are getting close here, and this is just going to take a few more seconds. Here we go. And so the job is complete. And now when I actually go back to that website that I'd set up, and I go to posts, you can see that I have failure is fun. I love demo fails. This is so much fun. And this is exactly where we were. And it says last modified and the date. So usually I'd be using a text. Yeah, right. So and so this happens automatically. So usually I would just be using Visual Studio Code for this, right? For whatever reason, my Git instance is messed up. And so because that is giving me issues, I'm not going to mess with that right now. And so the idea is once you have this set up, all you have to do, add new files. They can be text files, and they can have various templating with them so that you can, set up a post, or you can set up other things. And oftentimes there are certain templating languages where if you wanted to insert pure, a JavaScript or HTML or other kind of code, you could. But if you don't want to, and you just kind of want to look at the themes framework, it'll has like kind of guidelines of how you could do what you want it to do. And you can obviously adjust things in your root folder, to customize what your theme and what your site would look like. But once you've got it set up, the way Azure Static Web Apps works is that it's just automatically always going to push. So I don't have to kick anything off. I don't have to hit a publish button. I just have to commit something to the Git repository, and it's immediately going to kick off a new build, which is really, really fantastic, because I think that can be something that can be a barrier sometimes, even to people who were doing static sites in another way. It's like, okay, well, do I have to set up a whole, CI/CD pipeline, and do I have to do Travis and do this other stuff? No, GitHub Actions is just going to immediately monitor this, and once it sees that there's been a change, it's going to immediately kick off that build process and publish it up to the cloud. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And actually, one thing I kind of want to show here is that when I'm actually in browser and I'm looking at my site, gives me kind of my source, which will take me to where my master kind of branch is, or whatever name you want to use for that, as well as my YAML file, which has, what my build process looks like. But if I, and as well as my URL, but if I click on the deployment history, it'll show me these GitHub action runs, and it's going to immediately take me to that page that we just saw in GitHub Actions, which will show me kind of my whole thing and what my workflow is. And so what GitHub Actions is that it's a continuous integration / continuous deployment a tool, basically. And so what this means is that it's going to take care of the process of updating and publishing and pushing content to your application. And so instead of having to, if you've used Azure pipelines, that's a really similar tool. And in fact, GitHub Actions was built off of Azure pipelines. If you've used something like Travis CI or some of these other tools, it's a similar thing. And so the idea is that you don't have to do a manual build process each time. It can monitor for certain changes. You could say, okay, something with a certain tag or something that is a change that happens to a certain branch, that will kick off the build process and push that to the cloud. Or if you wanted to say, okay, if I have a change to master that has a certain tag and that has something else on it, then that's what's going to do it. You can get really granular. If you want to say ignore and don't do something, if it has these messages or these types of files that I just want to monitor, again, kind of like a specific branch or something else, I can do that. And so GitHub Actions is built into GitHub now, and you can do a bunch of integrations with not just Azure, but with a bunch of other clouds and a bunch of other services. And it makes it really easy to attach something to your GitHub repo to just basically say, okay, when I make a change to this repository, it's going to immediately, perform these other functions for me, and including building things out and even, integrating with other stuff. So you can do pretty great things with that.
Very cool. And I think, unfortunately, I was muted when I asked what GitHub Actions are. I think I'm unmuted now in OBS, but we'll see what happens. It's Bob is very kindly letting me know that he can't hear what I'm saying. I think it works now, but this is the beauty of OBS.
Bob let us know. Yes, Bob let us know. But in case anybody was unaware, Lars had asked me what GitHub Actions were, and that was why I started talking about that. And GitHub Actions is kind of a core part of how the Azure static web apps work. And in fact, actually, if we go into kind of this graphic, which really kind of shows what it is, you start with GitHub and you have your push or pull request going to your repository. That is going to then kick off the GitHub action, which is then going to go through the process of building your HTML, JavaScript, CSS. And there's an API using Azure Functions. So if you wanted to have certain routes, or if you wanted to do some other stuff with serverless to do other things for your site, you could do that too. And we're not going to have time to get into that today, but those are all things that are with the documentation that you've should be in the chat and people can check out. This was interesting. When Bob had asked earlier about authentication stuff, and so this is actually a good thing in terms of, I said I wasn't really sure I knew you could do things. There is actually authentication provider integrations using Azure Active Directory, Facebook, Google, GitHub, and Twitter, so a lot of OAuth providers. So there are things you can do within the API, certainly, to support that authenticated stuff, but also Bob, and again, I hope your name is Bob, I will be passing the feedback on to our team to make sure that we have some documentation about how to do that if we don't already, and maybe some in-depth kind of blog posts or videos to go through that process.
Yeah, awesome. So, yeah, because there's free SSL as well. Please, everybody, use the free SSL certificates.
Yes, use the free SSL. That's the thing. This is a great thing too. You get the free SSL certificate, which is automatically renewed. So it's similar. It's not Let's Encrypt, but it's similar. It's the same kind of idea. And you can also use a custom domain as long as you kind of point your CNAME things to Azure to control it too. So even though it's going to give me, this very memorable address of proudtree-07 whatever, even though it's going to give me that, if I want to change this to something else, I can do that. And so what's nice about this too is that you could kind of have like a staging version of your site. And this is another thing, a use case when we were talking about why people would want to do this that I didn't get into, which is if you do have kind of a scenario where maybe you want to have a preview of what things are going to look like before they go live and you want to test things out, this is a really great option because it gives you a staging version if that's what you want to do before it's going to go live. So if you're worried, you're like, okay, you know what, it's great that I can kick off this build process by making a change, but I'm a little uncomfortable with that, and maybe this is going to break things and have stuff in a certain way. You can also have it set up to just create kind of a staging version first before it's going to go live. So that's Azure Static Web Apps.
Very cool.
And I do apologize for whatever the issues are with Git on my machine. Now I'm going to have to investigate that. That's always fun.
That's all good.
You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to blame it on the fact that I'm going to blame it on using the Mac for the Azure demo with the Microsoft community. No, I'm kidding. We all our platforms work well, but something clearly happened with my Git configuration.
Yeah, so I'm not sure what happened there. I was trying to follow along,
I am going to blame my Mac for that.
Yeah, I'm not sure. That's what happens. I screwed up the audio on OBS here, so I think I got it right now. So it's what happens. Yeah. That was interesting to follow along, though. So thanks very much, Christina. I don't have any other questions on the chat because they kind of came in throughout the talk anyway. So where can we find you next? What are you up to now that you have to stay in your house?
Yeah, okay. So I mean, it's I don't know how much people can tell. My office is a disaster area right now because I have been ordering too many things off of Amazon, and my office was just progressively getting worse and worse. But I'm getting a new chair. I'm going to be cleaning my office. But I actually I've spent like many of you, I'm sure, watching. We've all Lars and I were talking about this before the started. We've all had to kind of become AV video production experts. And even those of us, like, I've always considered myself kind of like a gadget nerd, and I'm somebody who's like, oh, I love all the latest camera stuff. I think you showed me, like, you had like a really like robust like iPhone rig, I think at one point, didn't you? You were showing me some of the streaming stuff you were doing. Was that you, Lars?
I've got a gimbal.
Yeah.
A gimbal thing. It's very cool. It's not a selfie stick. Not a selfie stick.
Right. No, it's a gimbal.
It's a gimbal, and it basically keeps the camera steady. It's very cool.
Right. Right. And so, you know, we were kind of doing all this stuff about how we could do recordings and production things like from conventions, right? When we could actually go to meetups. And obviously some countries are better about that than others. That's all I'm going to say in terms of if their approach and when they might be back open to the public. But what's happened is that now a lot of us are having to do things from home. It's a completely different ball game. I'm finding like having to kind of do the in-home like setup, and we're all having to become like Twitch, you know, streamers or YouTube live streamers. So I bought like a camera that I'm using.
Sorry, hang on. I'll just change the camera here. Get rid of the city background, and people can see if they're interested. Because it's there we go. None. There we go. So this is, I record a show every week, right? And you can obviously see this is where it is. So it's just a small room. It's not like massively anything to it.
No,
so you can get away with little. I painted the blue wall because I don't like white walls. They're terrible to record against. But yeah, it's been an interesting change, having to kind of do everything from here. So yeah, I know what you're saying. It's ordering all the little bits, and it's not much money really. It's just little connectors and little pins and little things. Yeah, and getting it just right the way I like it.
Like figuring out why Git isn't working. You know, it's like how do I get my camera and my lights and everything talking together? And so I've spent a lot of my time spending more than I've needed to on equipment and trying to kind of replicate like the Channel 9 studio at Microsoft's offices in Redmond to my home office. I unfortunately am not a homeowner, so I can't paint my walls, but I do have a green screen that will pull down that I need to install, which because I'm like you, I hate the white walls, but might do some lighting stuff. So that's been what I've been doing, really kind of having to. And like I said, I've considered myself a pretty robust video person, but it's very different going from a record remotely thing to a live stream thing. Like it is different. And I used to do live streams on like my phone all the time, but again, it's kind of a different medium, like it's just it's different.
Yep, totally. Well, thanks very much, Christina. This has been very interesting, and I think we might stop it there because it's almost on the hour. But thank you so much for joining, and we will we'll obviously publish this on the YouTube channel with all the other sessions that we've had, so it lives on in perpetuity. And we hope to have you back someday on talking something else, Azure. Not sure what.
Yes, agreed. Thanks for having me. And everybody, check out Azure Static Web Apps. If you just have whatever your idea is, just play around with it. It's free. So give it a shot, play around with it, and let us know what your feedback is.
Excellent. All right, thanks. See you, everybody.